Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Dr. Helen Lavretsky. I'm a professor of psychiatry here at UCLA and direct an integrative psychiatry clinic. And we've been having a number of webinars now since June with our dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Patricia Gerbarg and Dr. Richard Brown, all the way from New York. And we've gone over psychological effects of stress due to COVID and breathing practices and also the use of supplements. And today we'll be covering new evidence and also the results of clinical experience by Dr. Gerbarg and Brown using different techniques, integrative techniques, including supplements, breathing techniques, and others. So please welcome our colleagues. And I did not realize when I was scheduling this webinar that we will be meeting on the 4th of November, and that is the day after election, the day that was supposed to be an easy time or relatively easy time, but it's not. The count is still going on, and I know we're all very stressed. So I think we should start this webinar with a brief meditation and breathing practice to calm down, center, to receive this information. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Helen. So we will start with a very short kind of breathing practice and a very lightning meditation so that you can more easily absorb the information we'll be sharing with you. So if you can, with your spine straight, whether sitting or lying down, if possible, closing your eyes or partway closing them if it's not comfortable to close them all the way. We're going to breathe in for 4, pause the breath for 4, breathe out for 6, pause the out breath 2, and we'll do a few of those kinds of breathing cycles, and then we'll do a short meditation. So let's synchronize breathing. Take a breath in. And breathing out. And breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Pause your breath effortlessly. 3, 4. And breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pause 2. Breathing in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathing out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pause the out breath 2. Breathing in. 2, 3, 4. Pause effortlessly. 3, 4. Breathing out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pause 2. Breath in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathing out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pause 2 again. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breath out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pause 2. And then just breathe naturally, allowing your breath to be in whatever rhythm it wants to be in. But become aware of your whole body right this moment. The skin all over the surface of your body. And then become aware of the volume, that is the space, inside your whole body. And as you feel the breath gently coming into your body, filling every cell with the energy it does from oxygen, As the breath leaves your body, imagine feeling like a flute or an empty pot, just filled with space. So the breath filling your body with energy, however gently and slowly it comes in. And then as the breath leaves, you're filled with empty space. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay, so we're going to talk about complementary and integrative therapies for COVID. This applies to other viral and respiratory infections. So we have no conflicts of interest. We do not get money from any companies with any of the things we'll talk about. We are co-authors on some of the references at the end of the lecture. So obviously, before trying natural supplements, you need to consult with your doctor. But the treatments we'll be covering in this lecture, most have been tested for effectiveness against either coronavirus, COVID-19, or other respiratory viral infections in vitro or in vivo. And some of the treatments have been tested against other infections, which have similar qualities to COVID, whether it's influenza or other things or other inflammatory conditions of the body. So some of the treatments we'll be talking about, many of the treatments have not been tested in double-blind placebo-controlled studies, but we have found them to be quite helpful for patients and need to be further studied. So until we have further information, you must take what we're saying with that caveat. But these things can be quite helpful in my clinical experience. They're low in side effects and can help protect or recover from COVID. So, you know the preventive measures we need to keep taking: masks, distancing, hand washing, sleep, diet, exercise. But the things we'll be talking about, many of them probably help the immune system to function better or to make it harder for the virus to get inside the body and replicate. So possible treatment targets: penetrating the cell and replication, reducing inflammation, including thrombotic events within the body, problems with the lungs, and then the neuropsychiatric symptoms. And of course, we feel that breathing is very important, but it must be extremely gentle breathing with COVID in the right position. So many things we'll talk about not only protect nerves, but are antioxidant and protect blood vessel cell walls, or blood vessel wall cells, that is. And they can also be good for anxiety, depression, PTSD, and the fatigue symptoms that so commonly co-occur with COVID, whether asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic, or severely symptomatic. So post-infection symptoms have not been fully appreciated yet, but many patients have severe symptoms that last for days or months. It's hard to get an estimate of the frequency. My experience with patients having significant COVID symptoms is perhaps 30 to 50% will have very significant persistent symptoms. And it's, in many cases, chronic fatigue, often muscle aches, weakness, other neurological symptoms, including very unpleasant paresthesias, so neural signals that are very uncomfortable and disturbing, anxiety, depression, irritability. Brain fog is a very common complaint, memory problems, executive dysfunction, and what we used to call neurasthenia, physical and mental fatigue, and persistent breathing problems. So over the years, neurasthenia overlaps with what we now call chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And usually those things are accompanied by significant signs of autonomic nervous system exhaustion. In the US, before COVID, the most common events before chronic fatigue syndrome are a car accident or a severe infection, most often influenza, and then in some parts of the country, Lyme disease, and now I think we will see a rash of COVID. Patients often have disturbed sleep cycles and have to take frequent naps. So many people are looking to create cocktails of prescription drugs which would be used off-label for COVID because it's easier to screen them. There are computer simulations to do that, and we'll be talking more about that. Famotidine was discovered early on in China to reduce the rate of COVID or severe COVID with death, comparing Wuhan to Beijing. And then people began to look at computerized models of certain compounds, including not only famotidine, but a hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, remdesivir, in the in silico model, which is a computer simulation of the protease needed to gain entry into our cells. But famotidine has some increasing data, and there is unpublished data that I know about from colleagues. I first learned about this from a colleague, Ken Halper, at NYU, and his colleagues there. So famotidine is an old histamine 2 receptor antagonist for reflux. Far fewer side effects compared to most medications. Can be taken orally or intravenously. There's data of its antiviral effects, and retrospective studies have showed benefits, and randomized clinical trials are now ongoing. So constipation, diarrhea, fatigue, weakness. Having prescribed it now in high dose for patients with serious COVID, most patients have no side effects. And very little interaction with the cytochrome P450 system, and do not affect levels of important drugs. So in one retrospective study published in Gastroenterology, 1,600 plus patients given famotidine for 6 days, twofold reduction in intubation and death. Then a case series using high-dose famotidine with improvement in shortness of breath and cough. And more recently, in the American Journal of Gastroenterology in August, almost 900 patients with almost 10% being given famotidine, lower mortality, lower intubation and mortality, and lower levels of inflammation markers in patients with severe COVID. So can famotidine deactivate enzymes needed for replication? This needs to be resolved with further studies, but certainly it's a promising lead for how famotidine might work. And here are references if you wish to look more fully at this. And again, there are several candidates for how famotidine might be working, but it also is a powerful antihistamine that may affect inflammation in the body as well. So it's hard to know at this stage. And this is a more simplified version of the enzymes which it may use to keep the virus from entering and replicating in our cells. And as I said, it may have other mechanisms of action, but we will see with further research. It may affect mast cells, which may be involved in some of the damage that comes from the coronavirus infection. Again, you may want to read more about this. There is a randomized controlled trial going on with high-dose intravenous famotidine. We will see. So I'll give you several of the cases I've treated. This was a 52-year-old woman, classic non-productive cough, myalgia, fever, fatigue, loss of taste and smell, positive on the nasal swab, unable to function for 4 weeks approximately. Then I had seen her for years for depression. She had been quite well, although that was relapsing as she got sicker with COVID. When she contacted me, I put her on 80 milligrams oral famotidine 3 times a day. After a week, she was much better. She was better for a month. She heard at the hospital, she goes out for her medical care, that they wanted to get antibodies of people who had had COVID. And she signed up to be a donor, and then she had to discontinue the famotidine. Within several days of stopping famotidine, she relapsed and all her symptoms came back. She contacted me, and within several days of starting her back on the famotidine, she began to recover and was good again after a week and remains on the famotidine at this time. And without more to guide us, my feeling is we're going to wait about 6 months before we take her off again. I could give you other cases, but we may come back to them toward the end. So we use many herbs and nutrients, as many of you know. This is a summary of some of the ones we use most, and we'll talk about with COVID, starting with French oakwood extract. So, 2 studies, randomized controlled studies of the French oakwood extract in chronic fatigue, 1 in PTSD, evidence in other fatigue and burnt out syndromes, and clearly significant effects on the internal biochemistry of our cells with reduced oxygen-free radicals and reduced homocysteine. And the oakwood extract is high in polyphenols, a unique class of polyphenols called L-gitannins, also found in the red mangrove tree of Fiji, which those of you who heard our previous lecture may remember, and we use it quite frequently in practice. So you can see it has a long history of showing antimicrobial and these compounds, antimicrobial, anti-cancer, heart protective, antioxidant compounds containing ellagic acid, which is found by itself in some other compounds, but it's complexed to the tannins. Tannins have antiviral activity and have been most studied against herpes simplex and HIV, and they are reverse transcriptase inhibitors. So they are promising in our clinical experience, and there is a scientific foundation to understand why that might be. And of course, the wine's been stored in oak wood for hundreds of years over time and keeps the wine from spoiling. And you can read more about this if you wish, but it certainly binds to the receptor binding site of the CoV-2. Here's a case of a 70-year-old doctor with a history of depression who had been stable on medication and was functioning well, and his wife. They both got sick with COVID. He was more ill than she, and he relapsed into his extreme depression and also complained of severe brain fog and fatigue. And as soon as he contacted me, I started him on the French oakwood extract, which in the studies was used at 200 or 300 milligrams a day. In 4 days, he was much improved in terms of fatigue and depression. Then 4 weeks later, he contacted me because he had developed a neuropathy, which was worse in his feet. And he said his feet felt like they were dissolving and turning to sand, and he couldn't confidently say where his feet were and was worried that he was going to fall and get hurt. I started him on famotidine, 80 milligrams 3 times a day. In a week, the neuropathy was gone and he was back to feeling better again. And you can see these are some of the references, not all, on the French oakwood extract. And this is a picture of the red mangrove tree of Fiji, which has probably at least 29 active compounds. So has a long use in Fiji for helping respiratory tract infections as well as skin problems. And the compounds in it enhance the immune system, are anti-inflammatory, anti-pain. They help wounds heal fast and have antiviral effects. And it could well be, since this extract is also high in quercetin, that it may help suppress inflammation and the cytokine storm in COVID-2. More research to be done. It comes with the brand name of Respigard on Amazon or Nature's Nurse. It's hard to harvest, so sometimes it will be on back order since the pandemic began. Generally, for prevention, I've recommended people take it twice a day if they're worried about COVID and may have significant exposure, like healthcare professionals, or people who need to travel on public transportation. For many respiratory infections, for years I've recommended it at least once a day. And we have years of using it with 9/11 responders with lung damage, helping them recover. But we need more planting of the red mangrove tree of Fiji, which might help with the surge in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is pruning the rhizomes to generate more trees and enhance the fisheries as well as the coastline. Sustainable cultivation has started on the Florida coast with eco-sensitive sustainability practices like they do in Fiji, where it's been used for God knows hundreds of years. And then black elderberry. I will let Dr. Gerbarg take over.
Thank you, Dick. So black elderberry is another supplement that we've used for literally decades for its general immune boosting and respiratory protective benefits. It does inhibit viral replication, has a long history of use for flu and respiratory infections, although controlled studies are needed. We mention this brand, Nature's Way Sambucus. Again, we mention specific brands because it's hard to know. People tell us which ones to get. These are not the only good brands. They're the ones that we're most familiar with. For acute infection, it is taken 4 times a day, and prevention, 1 or 2 teaspoons a day. There's a combination trial that was done using a combination of Rhodiola, Sambucus, that's the elderberry, and Nigella sativa seeds for infectious bronchitis with a chicken coronavirus. And these prevented the infection and inhibited the viral replication in these cell cultures. We all love shiitake mushrooms, and this is one more reason why we should enjoy them. An extract from the cell walls has immunomodulatory and cytoprotective properties. It is known for its antimicrobial as well as antioxidant effects. And there's a product called Beta Factor from American that is of very good quality. The extracts, the beta-glucan extracts, reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines and oxidative stress. And if you're interested in more of the details, you're welcome to read this slide when you have the time. We have a lot to cover today, so I don't have too many details. But basically, there is this current evidence of a study showing the effectiveness of the beta-glucans in reducing cytokines, and we know that cytokine storm is one of the big problems with the coronavirus infections. This is a case of Dick's. This was a 48-year-old school teacher. She and her 15-year-old son decided that they wanted to move in with their grandparents who are in their 70s. This is during the coronavirus crisis, of course. The son had been in a school play, but neither of them had had any symptoms. However, they were worried about bringing the coronavirus into the home of the grandmother and grandfather. So 4 days before the move, they, on Dr. Brown's advice, started taking a combination of beta-glucan, Respigard, and the elderberry extract. We usually recommend that people take a combination of supplements so that the idea is that each of these has different mechanisms of action, and it makes sense since there's no clear proven one solution, that by taking a combination, you're utilizing several mechanisms that will enhance immune defense. So that's the rationale for combining several of them. So they began taking this combination 4 days before moving into the grandparents' home. After they had moved into the home, the school called to tell them that 13 of the kids from the school play were sick with COVID. So as soon as they found out, they increased their doses of the supplements to enhance their protection, since now they knew the son had been exposed. A week later, the mother and the son developed very mild COVID symptoms that only lasted a few days. However, both the grandparents became ill with COVID, and their symptoms were worsening day by day. The grandmother had mild to moderate symptoms, but the grandfather became severely ill. They had refused to take the supplements preventatively. However, once they got sick, they agreed, they acquiesced, okay, we'll take the supplements, which they began taking the beta-glucan, the Respigard, and the elderberry. 5 days later, they began to improve, and by day 14, the grandmother and grandfather were completely well. Now, olive leaf extract has been used to protect against infections for hundreds of years. It does contain polyphenols that have antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant properties, and they may reduce the severity or protect against upper respiratory infections. There is evidence that they inhibit viral replication in vitro. And we mentioned here a good brand of olive factor from American. There are other companies as well. This is a list of a special class of herbs called adaptogens. And you can see that I'm going to run through some of these as we go through. Adaptogens are herbal extracts that protect against multiple stressors. They do increase attention and endurance under stress. They mitigate or prevent stress-induced impairments in disorders related to the neuroendocrine and immune systems. And they're also metabolic regulators involved in cellular repair of the mitochondria and other mechanisms. The roots of these contain many antioxidants. So we're talking about plants whose parts, whether it be the roots or the berries, have multiple components with bioactivity, which can affect different aspects of these conditions. They also have epigenetic effects. Review of numerous preclinical studies show that adaptogens have effects on multiple targets for prevention or treatment of viral infections. They do have modulatory effects on immune response, anti-inflammatory activity, also detoxify and repair the damage that is induced by these viruses. And we know that the coronavirus can cause significant tissue damage. So this is going to help the body repair. They also have specific antiviral effects, interacting with viral docking. That's how the virus attaches to the cellular membranes and enters the cell, and also effects on viral replication. I'm going to recommend this article by Panosian and Brendler, which came out in September. It's an extensive review of the literature of the various adaptogens and the various mechanisms of cellular protection and recovery that have been identified in each of those adaptogens, as well as some others. The adaptogens also have non-specific antiviral actions. So the rationale here is, let's boost the general ability of the cells to resist viral infections, as well as the specific. So they can activate the complement system and the ability to recognize the receptors, downregulate expression of inflammatory cytokines, and active immunity involving T cells, B cells, and antibodies. Andrographis paniculata is another adaptogen that's been known to protect against influenza. It's native to India and Sri Lanka. It has not been tested in COVID yet, but it has the general properties to suggest that it would be helpful. Karen Herbs has a nice product called Cold Care. And this is a general protection against a wide range of infections. This is the sort of thing one could take one a day for general protection, and then more when one becomes symptomatic. It has been shown to inhibit retrovirus, enhance lymphocyte proliferation, and also to inhibit the Epstein-Barr virus. Rhodiola rosea, those of you who know us know that this is one of our favorite and most widely used adaptogens. It's considered sort of one of the strongest adaptogenic herbs. It is rich in antioxidants. It enhances cellular repair at the level of the mitochondria. And if you look into some of the articles by Panosian, it goes into great detail about these mechanisms. One of the reasons we use it is because it's very good for mood, and we often use it as a complementary treatment for depression, but it also increases energy, mental focus, and memory. So, for example, people who are suffering from the coronavirus often are exhausted, and the residual effects of this chronic fatigue, which is quite debilitating. People literally can't get out of bed, they can't get back to work. This goes on for months if it's not treated. And that further contributes to people getting more depressed. So if you have a tendency to depression and you can't get out of bed and you can't do anything, that's just going to make you feel worse. So this is a situation where something like rhodiola, which is going to help improve your energy, help repair whatever damage was done when you had the virus, and improve your mood, as well as the mental fog. A lot of people complain that they're like mentally foggy, they can't focus, their memory's off. And all of these symptoms are the type of thing we've had a lot of experience over the years. We've used Rhodiola rosea for many conditions that affect these types of brain functions, and it can be extremely helpful. In terms of side effects, they're very mild. Some people who are very sensitive to stimulants can get overactivated on it or feel jittery, especially if they take caffeine with it. So we usually tell them to cut their caffeine. There have been a lot of screenings and trials. We're not going to go into details. Chinese herbal medicine, there's an extensive literature. And now what's happening is the same techniques that have been applied to find pharmaceuticals that might be useful against coronavirus. Those same methods, the same computational methods are now being used to screen hundreds of herbs and herbal combinations in China. And I've been identifying, and there's a whole literature about this, which ones may have positive interactions with either the cell components, proteins, or other things, and be able to interfere again with either the entry or the replication of the viruses, particularly the polyphenols, which Dr. Brown mentioned, ellagic acid and gallic acid, the French oakwood extracts, the ellagic tannins, which are in a number of different herbs, Chinese herbs, and the rhodiola as well. So if you're interested in those details, one thing we do want to mention is that these computational methods can identify substances that have reason to be researched and that might be helpful. But when you actually get into using them in the real life system of a person or an animal, you may or may not see the effects that you're looking for. So it is important that these be tested in live systems. And that's where clinical observation comes in. Even though we may not have overwhelming numbers, at least we've seen something that actually does show us effects. And that then has to be verified by the controlled studies. But it may be years before we're able to have randomized controlled studies of all of these supplements. And in the meantime, people need something to help them overcome this illness. So we use rhodiola for relieving fatigue, cognitive dysfunction. It's antibacterial, antidepressant, and so forth. It should be taken 20 minutes before food on an empty stomach, and it can be increased by 1 capsule every few days. These are some of the products that we've used. It's important to get good quality products, particularly in these herbs. And the Adapt formula is a combination of rhodiola, eleutherococcus, and schizandra, which seems to be a really good balance of the different components and has been tested extensively. We've gone over this in our previous lecture. This is the eleutherococcus, which does enhance the benefits of the rhodiola and has its own studies. Schizandra canensis also. It has been proven to improve cognitive performance. I'm going to talk very briefly about SAMe, which is a pivotal molecule in cellular metabolism, and it ranks with ATP. It's distributed in all tissues and fluids of the body and is involved in over 100 essential biochemical reactions. In 2002, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services issued a quality report concluding that treatment with SAMe was equivalent to standard pharmacotherapy for depression and osteoarthritis. And this is an article which reviews that, which was part of a study done by the APA. Here you can see SAMe, some of its actions. One of its primary effects is what's called methylation, and that turns on the transcription of DNA. And it is important in the production of proteins, phospholipids, and neurotransmitters. SAMe is a very effective antidepressant. It's low in side effects, and it has the additional health benefits that not only does it help the brain function better, it helps cognitive function, but it also detoxifies the liver and other tissues and protects the body from toxic effects from other substances. So this is one of the reasons that we might recommend this, because you're getting, instead of bad side effects, you're getting good side effects. It's demonstrated to be helpful in neuronal repair. And now we're starting to see that coronavirus can cause neurological damage. It's very good for the energy and the depression, the mood. It can induce mania in bipolar patients, as do other antidepressants. SAMe, however, has no adverse interactions with any medication. That's never been found, okay? It's a natural substance in all of our cells. We recommend, there are a number of different forms of SAMe, and this may be a bit controversial, but this is what we feel from our basic clinical experience with SAMe, which is over 20 years of working with patients. There is a 1,4-butane disulfonate form that we feel is the most powerful in terms of its clinical effects. It is difficult, has been difficult to get that form in the United States, but it is now available. A company is producing a product called Azendus, which is made, a high quality tablet made with the 1,4-butane disulfonate, and that is the one we're recommending for our patients. Although there are many people taking the tosylate form from other companies, It does show effects. It's not ineffective, but we think the 1,4-butane disulfonate is even better. And we can use it for depression, whether it's mild to moderate. It's also very effective for fibromyalgia. And again, myalgia is a symptom of the coronavirus. There have been 6 studies of SAMI showing benefits in fibromyalgia. People are very interested in zinc, and that's now being studied because of its role for immune function. It does inhibit viral replication. In countries where there are zinc deficiencies, it's particularly important to supplement. That's not generally, we don't find a lot of zinc deficiency in the United States. Remains to be seen in these trials just how much effect zinc is going to have on the course of coronavirus. That's not known. We're not going to talk about vitamin D or vitamin C, even though I know they're being researched. Again, it remains to be seen if a person is not deficient in these, it remains to be seen whether further supplementation will enhance their ability to fight off the coronavirus. And hopefully that data will be out soon. We don't know yet. The role of the traditional Chinese medicines is not clear yet. There's been a lot of preclinical work on this, but we're waiting to see some clinical trials that will really give us more information. So the coronavirus affects multiple systems through numerous mechanisms. And so we need to look at numerous mechanisms for prevention, treatment, and recovery. They can directly target the viral molecular processes of entry and replication. They can increase the overall antiviral immune defenses, increase the overall protection of cellular tissues and components using antioxidants and protecting the endothelium as well. And they can improve the cellular energy, because we need cellular energy if we're going to repair the cells, okay? And so during severe infections, you get damage to the cellular energy production. So that has to be attended to as well. So we've developed a kind of roadmap. I wouldn't quite call it an algorithm since we don't have the randomized controlled trials to test it. But we thought we would just base this again on our clinical experience and depending on the symptoms that are most prominent. So in patients where the main complaints have to do with cough, shortness of breath, we at this time are using Famotidine first, Respigard, which is very good for respiratory tract protection, certainly respiratory therapy and expectorants, and coherent breathing, which we covered in one of our previous webinars. If the problems also involve fatigue or fibromyalgia, again, Famotidine, and in these instances, SAMI, the S-adenosylmethionine, between 400 and 1,200 milligrams a day. This would also be a place to use the French oak wood, the Robuvit, and some of the other adaptogens, Schizandra and Eleutherococcus. I see that I forgot to put the Rhodiola in here. So I'm going to make a mental insert. The Rhodiola rosea goes in with the other adaptogens. And in the third column, for brain fog, mental focus, and executive functions, again, Famotidine, the French oak wood, definitely the Rhodiola, and the SAMI, and also American ginseng and Panax ginseng. So this is just, as I said, a general roadmap. When you think about what do you start with, at this point, we're starting with Famotidine, and then we're adding on these other components. So future directions for prevention and recovery have to do with determining natural compounds with antiviral effects that could protect people from the infection, not only from the SARS-CoV-2, but future variants of it that may come along. Because, you know, we have to have the development not only of the first vaccine, but there'll be others. The vaccines are not 100% effective, so it makes sense to have in our toolkit various combinations of supplements that are going to help and complement whatever the vaccine protection provides for us. So we're looking at molecular docking to find high binding affinity between herbal compound molecules and the COVID-19 receptor, to prevent entry into human cells and replication, and to help repair the damage of the cells. And identifying natural compounds that are known to have anti-inflammatory effects for trials in COVID treatments, synthesize molecules and evaluate them in test tubes, in vitro, animal models, and then humans, and trials of natural compounds that are known to reduce symptoms that are similar to those found in the COVID patients: fatigue, myalgia, depression, PTSD. We're going to see PTSD, and we've already seen it with the COVID epidemic, cognitive dysfunction, and pulmonary fibrosis. And of course, we haven't talked this time about the breathing techniques we use for mass disasters to treat PTSD. But COVID is a global mass disaster, and these methods will be helpful. Here are some resources for those of you who want to come to our website, which is the Breath, Body, Mind, where we have more information. This webinar will be posted on the UCLA website for a few weeks, and after that, it will be on our website for those who want to see it. Here are some of our books in which we go into details about many of the herbs and nutrients we've mentioned in our talk today. And the APA has also published a book which we edited on complementary integrative treatments, which also covers many of these. And I think that is where we're going to be ending our lecture and moving on to the Q&A portion.
Yes, thank you very much for this very informative and enlightening talk. This information is not easy to come by, so it's very unique. I hope our listeners understand it. So we do have some questions about famotidine. Can you go to the Q&A section?
Yes, first I'm going to let Dick sit down, Dr. Brown sit down with me, and then we'll go to the questions.
Okay. So long-term use of high-dose famotidine, does it have a downside?
I don't think we know yet.
Uh-huh.
I think that's one of the things that needs to be done is monitor people. You know, since there are now a good number of people who've gotten it, at least in retrospective study, I think the patients are out there to study. There has to be will to study it. You'll notice, if you all remember, when President Trump was sick, there was much talk in the media about remdesivir and polyclonal antibody, but everybody saw famotidine was one of his medications, but no one realized, I think, in the media that might have a direct impact, not on reflux, but on the virus. But notice, because it's a cheap generic drug, nobody talked about it. It was the expensive things we heard about.
Ah, now I understand. Okay, but we do know, there are millions of people who are using famotidine for, so we probably know from that experience what the effects are.
Yeah, so generally it's used for GERD. I've taken it for GERD personally for some time now. The dose for GERD is usually around 20 to 40 milligrams twice a day, and it's over the counter in a 20 milligram capsule because it is so relatively low in side effects and low in interactions with other drugs that it's considered quite safe. Now, Dick has been using it in higher doses, 80 milligrams 3 times a day for his COVID patients. But again, he's not seeing problems, and we'll just be following people and seeing if they occur.
So the effect of famotidine on the rheumatoid arthritis, does it need to be prescribed in a higher dose, or it could be both?
Yeah, higher than the reflux dose, anti-reflux dose. Yeah. So initially, when people realized that it was having an impact, they didn't think it would get good blood levels orally, and they immediately began intravenous study. But that's not really practical for millions of people.
Is there effect on inflammatory arthritis anti-inflammatory effect?
I'm not aware of any data on that. We'd have to look.
Okay. And how about the use of black elderberry with pancreatitis?
Should be no problem at all. So black elderberry has a long use in Austria and Eastern Europe for viral respiratory infections. There's one controlled study of one brand of black elderberry for patients inoculated with influenza, being given either black elderberry or placebo, and the symptoms in the elderberry group were definitely milder and shorter compared to the placebo group.
Right. So the next question gets into this cytokine storm. Immune stimulants, should they be discontinued when patient gets hyperinflammatory reaction?
Well, see, the nice thing about natural immunostimulants is they do not overstimulate. They bring you to a better balance. That's what's so nice about adaptogenic substances. If you're too high, they bring you down. If you're low, they bring you up. That's different from prescription drugs that tend to be like a blunt hammer that knocks you down. And this is different. They balance kind of more what you need.
Okay, and the adaptogens helping Epstein-Barr virus, high titers, or is it more for prevention or of acute illness?
It's been used in acute infection of Epstein-Barr virus.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which at one time was often posited to be a major cause of chronic fatigue. My feeling is some people get chronic fatigue from it and many don't.
Any concerns about the use of these herbs in children?
Not at all. So whether it's black elderberry or, the Respigard, they're used in children with no side effects or problems. Now, famotidine, I can't speak to that. That's a prescription drug, and I don't know that there's any data on its use in children.
I don't think that, yeah, in terms of children, probably not under the age of a year. We don't
And
have
the dose should be probably titrated down, right?
Yes.
A body weight?
By
Okay.
body weight, yeah.
Any routine prevention protection, air travel specifically?
Well, for years I've recommended for myself, because I used to fly a lot before the pandemic, and my business traveler patients from New York, that they start on the Andrographis paniculata about 4 days before they go, to take it during the trip and to take it for 3 or 4 days after they return. At this point, I would say I would do usually something like Rhodiola rosea and black elderberry and Respigard and cold care. And if you want extra protection, beta-glucan and olive leaf. You know, it depends on how much insurance you want and what your risk factors are and what your pocketbook is comfortable with.
What about famotidine for air travel?
And I would also say, I'm telling my patients who have to travel, is I recommend going on a dose of famotidine, like at least 40 milligrams twice a day.
Okay.
And consider, if they feel like they're starting to get symptoms, to boost it to 80 milligrams 3 times a day.
And this is a couple of days before or just during travel?
Well, I would get a blood level like 4 days before.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't mean blood test. You mean just start taking it so that it is up to a decent level when you're flying. So it takes several days to build it up in your system before you get on the plane.
Right. So anything about older adults, about dosing and approach?
Well, first of all, they especially need these because they are more susceptible. Their defense systems are not as strong. Their cells are not as able to protect and repair. So definitely, I would say for old people to look seriously at this, especially if they're not really completely isolated. I mean, if you're able to totally isolate in your home and you have no exposure to anybody or anything, good for you. But if you do have to go out or interact, or you know you're going to have to go out to a doctor's appointment or some situation, you might want to start taking these like a week before to give yourself some added protection before you actually are there. I personally do this. I start a week before I go to visit my grandchildren. I double the doses of all of my immune boosters to fortify myself. And since I've been doing that, I don't get sick anymore when I see them. So, it does work for some of us.
Can you share your remedies, the list of
Pardon?
things? Can you share with us what you're taking?
What I take,
We'll have what you're taking.
everything we talked about pretty much, except I don't take olive leaf because it doesn't agree with me. But I do take the Famotidine. Rhodiola, I would not leave the house without it, and Samia would not leave the house without it. I take the Respigard, and that's the one that I double or triple if I know I'm going to be exposed to something. I also take the Sambucol religiously. I also take Biostrath, which we didn't get into today, and some others. We didn't get into Cystanche, which is in an immune formula. I could go on and on. My husband is a psychopharmacologist and an herbal specialist, so I have a lot of
So
protection.
in Chinese models, in vitro, they found Cystanche was an herb that protected against COVID. It is the only formula I can find it in the US is marketed by a company called Life Extension Foundation. And it combines two other things, including a mushroom extract with the Cystanche. But in terms of what I've seen in my patients, the ones on Respigard and Rhodiola and beta-glucan seem to be better protected, definitely, than people on nothing. I feel like the Famotidine, I suspect it either reduces inflammation from COVID or reduces replication or both. It doesn't boost the immune system. The other thing that we haven't talked about that I keep thinking about seeing cases and treating people is it's clear that there's endothelial damage and small strokes going on in many people that are silent. And so one of the herbal things that heals endothelial damage and strengthens the endothelium is pycnogenol, which has many, many controlled trials. Interestingly, done by the same company that produced the French oakwood extract. It comes from a very different tree, and it does not help, pycnogenol does not help chronic fatigue, but it's great at strengthening the endothelium. So with some patients who have obvious signs that they've had various damage to different organs, I'm using pycnogenol. The other thing is because inflammation is so much a part of this, I have one patient where I had put her on lumbrokinase, which is an enzyme that comes from Chinese earthworms and is dramatically effective for inflammation, including that it dissolves amyloid in the brain and removes amyloid from the brain. And I had put her on it because she had a very high family history of heart attack at about age 50. And she also had a lot of arthritis and inflammation, which all of that dramatically improved, and her lipid profile in her arteries improved on the lumbrokinase. Her closest friend and she both got COVID. Her friend died and she was fine. And she called me and she said, "Do you think this protected me?" I said, "Well, we'll have to study it."
Right. Somebody's asking about being postmenopausal and rhodiola having a waxing and waning effect. Sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's effective.
More effective than other times.
I've written about rhodiola and postmenopausal women. In my practice, it's very helpful for a number of aspects of menopause, including especially the brain fog, but also energy and mood and mental clarity and memory. Now, I don't know what brand this individual is taking, But I will say it is critically important to get a best quality brand of rhodiola, because otherwise, there's a lot of adulteration that goes on now. And one of the things that they're doing is there are markers, chemical markers like salitricides and so forth. And what they'll do is, if they process a batch and the markers aren't high enough, instead of adding more rhodiola, they'll just synthesize the markers, put them in, and make it look better than it really is. So that's why we recommend those companies in the lecture, because we've investigated and known them, and they've given us information about how they process it and how they maintain their quality. And we see in our patients, these are the brands that are consistently over time maintained. Now, if you're having a fluctuation in the effect, again, I would need more details, which effect. Sometimes people need a change in their dose, or they may be doing something else. And also, there's no product that's going to be perfect 100% of the time. But in general, I would say first check your brand and make sure that you're getting the right brand and that you're taking it in a high enough dose, but not beyond what it should be. In our book, How to Use Herb Nutrients and Yoga and Mental Health, we go into great detail, about how to take it, how to make it work, and all those sorts of things. Are you taking it on an empty stomach, 20 minutes before food? All of these details can affect how effective it is for you.
Right. So there are some questions about side effects of rhodiola causing panic, mania, hypertension. Does it cause hypertension?
Rhodiola rosea is activating. It's a stimulating antidepressant, though it doesn't cause the kind of withdrawal that stimulants do. Because it's an antidepressant, if a person has bipolar disorder, just as any other antidepressant can cause a manic reaction, definitely. Some people are sensitive to stimulants. If you happen to be someone who gets jittery or overactivated, then it's not for you. Sometimes I have to use very small doses in sensitive people. I've had patients who are responding to a quarter of a capsule, and they can't take more than that. So
meaning around 25 or 50 milligrams a day.
Right. Normally a capsule is 100 to 150 milligrams. So some people, even just a fraction. So those reactions can occur. And if people tend to get anxious with an anxiety disorder, and you give them too much activation, it may trigger the anxiety, just as if a person tends to have an irregular heartbeat or get tachycardic. That I've seen a couple of cases where that's happened as well. Although generally it's good for heart function. So be aware that some people are sensitive, and if you happen to have that, then it's not for you. Or maybe you need to just start with a pinch, which you can dissolve in tea, and then little by little increase it. But if you start to get symptoms, obviously don't continue.
There's a question about using these herbs for Parkinson's and the cognitive symptoms of Parkinson's.
I did research with a group at Columbia and then NYU for years, using first SAMe and then rhodiola and other things. So I find rhodiola is extremely helpful for patients with Parkinson's, as is SAMe. And in the former Soviet Union, where they were particularly using rhodiola for their cosmonauts and other high performance individuals, they showed great improvements in cognition, but they showed it helped Parkinson's induced by antipsychotic drugs. Okay. So it certainly, from animal and human models, looks like rhodiola does gently stimulate the dopamine system. It's not the only adaptogen I use for Parkinson's, but it's the one I most often start with.
Could you also mention, because you have to sometimes use very high doses of SAMe with your Parkinson's patients?
Right. So we published a case series taking Parkinson's patients who had stopped responding to levodopa, which often occurs between 5 to 8 years. It stops working, and it looks like the receptors habituate in the nerve membrane, and they stop being activated by levodopa. And what we found was giving SAMe change the receptors so they then began responding again to levodopa, and they'd respond to just a fraction of levodopa that they'd been needing. And in dopamine cell cultures, levodopa ages the dopamine cell very fast. It makes it work hard, but it ages it quickly. And when you put SAMe into the cell culture, the nerves are unaffected. So what we found, and in the case series we published, it was like 20 patients or more, all these people who'd stopped responding, we found if we gave, well, first of all, there was data before we did anything showing that patients with Parkinson's had very low levels of SAMe in their spinal fluid. And that when you give the SAMe, you need to do it at the same time as you give the levodopa. And we were giving often 800 milligrams 4 times a day with levodopa. And the patients looked so much better and felt so much better as well.
There's another question, similar question about multiple sclerosis patients and being on immunosuppressive medications.
Yeah, again, with these natural things, it's fine. The prescription things we use that work on the immune system are very powerful but blunt instruments. The natural compounds are much more gentle. So I'm not concerned about that for someone with MS.
But yeah, but would it counteract, let's say somebody has MS, is on immunosuppression, and the drugs or herbs and supplements you're recommending increase immune system?
Right. Well, if someone is post-transplantation, say of a kidney, I'm not going to recommend these things. And, because it may interfere with what they need to keep from rejecting. But that's different. I haven't had a problem with MS patients.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What is the brand for lumbrokinase enzyme?
Yeah, it's marketed. One of the names is, I think the name it's most commonly marketed in the US and Canada is Bolu-OK. B as in boy, O as in orange, L as in love, O as in orange, U as in union, K as in kitten, E as in Edward. It is expensive, but it's, in functional natural medicine, many anti-inflammatory things are used. I've found this works better than anything. It is pricey. That's the biggest issue. I know what I've done is order it for some of my patients, but just in the last few months, I think Doctor's Best has had a good price on it. So many of my patients have been able to get it on their own to take it. Yeah.
So they're asking about prolonged COVID, and you covered it. I wonder if you could just put your algorithm.
Yeah.
Is it
So again, I think to me, this is the thing that the media, although you hear about it, no one has realized what's going to happen when we have millions of people, half of whom have chronic fatigue, and they can't function, they can't work, they can't get out of the house because they're so neurasthenic. And what I like about the French oakwood extract is it often starts working in a short time, and it does not produce the anxiety and agitation that rarely comes with rhodiola. If someone has brain fog, I'm likely to move to rhodiola quickly. But if they have pure chronic fatigue without the cognitive interference of the COVID, they get energy back. So I had COVID and I was really sick. And after about 10 weeks, when my acute symptoms resolved, I thought, oh, okay, I'm good. And then I realized if I did a little bit of work, I'd fall asleep for 2 hours, unpredictably, anytime, day or night. And I did not have my usual energy and I couldn't do exercise. Mm-hmm. And 4 days after starting the oakwood extract, it was like my brain started working again. And that's the first one I use. But some people are really sick. So they may need rhodiola, they may need the olive leaf, they may need famotidine in combination.
Mm-hmm. I just want to mention here, yes, he was very sick with COVID. And before he developed the symptoms, I was totally exposed because, as in many cases, he was asymptomatic and we were married, we're together. But unlike him, I was on a lot of immune boosters because when we travel, I take a lot of immune boosters. And I was on famotidine, not knowing back then that it had anything to do with it. So just by chance, I had all of the immune boosters on the list in my system in high doses, and I did not get sick, not at all. And he was really ill.
And she
normally
commonly
it's-
gets respiratory infections.
It's normally the other way around. So
Do you have any sense about who gets bad COVID versus light COVID? You know, like, no, it's random, you think?
No, that's
No?
right. Well, no, I don't think it's random. I just don't think we have any idea of the genetics. And that's the thing, is it's like Russian roulette. You don't know if there's a bullet in your chamber.
Yeah. So a question about dementia Lewy body type, SAMI in combination with galantamine or Namenda, can it be done? Is it helpful? Well,
There's been 30 years of research, first in animals and then in humans, using a low dose of SAMI combined with a low dose of acetyl L-carnitine, a low dose of N-acetylcysteine and B vitamins. One study in people showed it helped mild cognitive impairment. One study showed it helped early Alzheimer's. Another study showed it helped patients with severe Alzheimer's, and their donepezil started working again. So
yeah, that's very
that's the
interesting.
combination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is Artemisia annua? Do you know?
That's a medicine that's often used for malaria,
Okay.
a natural medicine, but my feeling is it might be helpful for COVID. We don't have experience using it. I'm concerned that the world stock of it may be obliterated in the near future. It's not really being sustainably harvested.
Sarah, did you want to answer this question? Or do you know anything about it, Artemisia? What is the brand for oakwood extract that you're using?
My understanding is that it's made by the British company Horfog, patented by them, that also did so many studies of pycnogenol. So I think it's franchised out to different companies who kind of put their own little name on it, but it's all quality controlled by the same company that has so much experience working with tree extracts.
the one that we're accessing is called Robuvit, R-O-B as in boy, U,
V as in victory.
I, T as in Tom, Robuvit.
So there's Robuvit, there's Ribogen, there's Nusapure. The doses they used in the studies were 200 or 300 milligrams. There is a company that also markets 100 milligrams. In a few cases, my patients with COVID got partially better at 200 and 300. And then when I went to 400, about half of them said they started feeling worse. So at this point, I think there's a reason they only use 200 and 300 milligrams in the studies, and I stay with that.
Okay.
Just taking 200 milligrams in the morning on an empty stomach, like half hour before breakfast.
And so there's quite a bit of frustration about the ability to discern from the literature, and people are asking for your sources where you get your information and anything you could recommend in terms of websites or sources of information, reliable sources of information.
So, in the slides, we have references on many of the slides and extra. So if you go and look at the slide set, which will be on the website, you'll be able to pick up some of those references. We do literature searches through the National Library of Medicine, PubMed website, and all of that. And then in addition to that, we have our clinical practice. And we also, will contact researchers. If someone has done a study we're interested in, we can contact that researcher and have our own conversation. We can contact herbal companies and find out more details about their manufacturing practices. So those are but a lot of it is just the experience, because we don't believe anything until we see it with our own eyes, when we're either in ourselves, like has been happening with this situation, and in our patients over and over again over time. That's the final proof to us, is when we see it with our own eyes.
Yeah. So Pat did an amazing job doing the research for this lecture and putting the slides together. So there's that side of things. For me, my father's father was a master mushroom healer, which is an art found in China, Japan, and Eastern Europe and Poland. And I just grew up, he would take me to his mushroom clinic. He would use different mushrooms to heal different things. So, and then later on, I was exposed to Japanese and Chinese healers, as well as American Indian healers. And I think part of our problem is when you can't even imagine that these things possibly do it, you're not curious about it. And I remember as a boy asking my grandfather, when I saw him heal people, I said, "How do you know this mushroom is going to help them?" And he said to me, "It tells me if it can do it." And it took many years to understand what he really meant by that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you can't beat that, like it's in your genes, probably the knowledge and the
Right.
predisposition to discerning about all this delicate differences between the herbs. They're asking about authors to search, any particular authors. I personally go to clinicaltrials.gov to look at what's going on right now. And you could search clinical trials for COVID, or specifically what disease or symptom cluster you're looking for information about. Any other advice or?
Well, if you find a research group that over time produces reliable information, then you might want to follow them and their studies, which you can do. There are websites like ResearchGate, where researchers often will put up their articles before they're published, so you can kind of see what's coming up. And also you can, they'll follow you, you can follow them. So there are places that researchers go to exchange information as well.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Sarah, do you have any questions for our guests? Dr. Sarah Nguyen is a co-director of this Integrative Psychiatry Clinic with us here at UCLA. So anything you want to say? We're not hearing you.
I don't know what's happening.
Okay.
There you are.
Okay. No, but thank you so much for all the information today and for coming back to be with us on this webinar. And if this wasn't mentioned already, I'll type it in the chat, but Dr. Gerbarg and Brown also have a website with a lot of good information in addition to our integrative mental health website, which I think I've sent out, but I'll put both of those in the chat for everyone to see. And the webinar will be recorded and posted there within the week or two once it's been edited.
Okay. Yeah. So
Thank you.
right. Okay, very good. So anything else in conclusion? I mean, we're in such stressful, how do you view this continuation of our reality between COVID and the elections and the financial collapses or uncertainties? What do you foresee? What do we need to do? How do we prepare?
Right. Well, what I've been recommending in the breathing courses I teach is that people first listen to the original Hopi Elders message. If you just Google Hopi Elders message, that's the first step. The second one is White Horse, one of the Hopi Elders, recently released an updated version of the message. So the first message came out in 2001, shortly before 9/11, because they saw that was going to happen and that it was coinciding with dramatic changes. And then the update is very important. But what I'd say is, I know so many people are pessimistic. Some of you may have seen the poem by Kathleen O'Meara about the pandemic. And I'd say, I think the young people are going to kind of come on board and really lead people in a much better way in about 3 years. I think we have a challenging 3 years of what I consider to be purification, because people have not suffered much compared to how our ancestors suffered for most of our evolution. And the young people now need to step up and bring us forward into a more positive connected kind of evolution as a species, and heal the planet. And we have to work on together helping ourselves heal. And I think that will come. I think that the current challenges are quickly going to accelerate into more and more climate challenges, which we need to work together on all over the world. And in suffering through that, we will grow, and I hope make a new world. But it really requires the young people to play the big role.
Yeah, I agree with that, that there's an undercurrent of hope that is beneath everything that's going on and visible to a naked eye. There's also a process that we're all aware of, spiritual awakening throughout the world. And young people coming forward with new ideas and new technologies. I feel like we're writing a book on technological innovation due to COVID.
Right.
You know, it's going to be out actually in December. So I'll send you a copy.
Great.
And it's really enlightening. And I worked with my previous former fellows who are young people, you know, and they're extremely positive about the future. So they feel like this is an opportunity to innovate, bring forth new technology.
I think also, especially in the healthcare area, the ability to use the online media, now we can bring healing knowledge and techniques anywhere in the world where they haven't been able to go before. So, for example, our breathing programs, which help people learn to balance their stress systems and cope with more stress, people can come on and join us and learn these things from anywhere in the world, and they're starting to do that. So for us, it's a very exciting opportunity to get something out that is so much needed around all over the world.
Right,
And
connections to the technology is very important.
One of our teachers is from South Africa. She came to train with me in Rwanda several years ago. So she's using the breathing to help people recover from the effects of apartheid. And we could do the same thing here. The other thing is we learned not just using the breathing, but Tibetan herbs with 9/11 responders to detox them from what they absorbed at ground zero. And basically, soon after that, in the early 2000s, a pediatric neurologist in Mexico City described how the particulate matter from trucks was going from the lungs to the brain of children and older people, causing major cognitive problems. And we have now the same particulate matter from the fires that's been released.
Yes.
And I've tried to get people interested in looking at how the herbs we've used repaired the 9/11 responders, but it's using natural things. People don't realize at the time of the Bronze Age, we were all lead toxic. Everybody was smelting lead for weapons and armor. And basically, they were all toxic. And so Tibetan monks developed ways of detoxifying heavy metals. And my feeling is we can use those same things to detox from the particulate matter. But no one yet seems to be interested because it's not mainstream medicine.
Well, I'm interested. So if you have any ideas, we'll put together a study to do that, you know.
Good.
And for those who are interested in various concoctions of hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and antibiotics, go to the clinicaltrials.gov, and there are a number of studies that are being done with these combinations. Unless you have something else to say about hydroxychloroquine. No? No.
Well, see, I used to see patients from New York who went to Africa back in the old days. Hydroxychloroquine was chloroquine was what people would take to prevent malaria. And they'd have to be medevaced out because they were in a paranoid psychosis. And treat them with antipsychotics. So when the media started talking about it, I had all those patients calling me and texting me and emailing and saying, "Doctor, you've got to give me hydroxychloroquine and you've got to give me azithromycin." And I'm like, "No." And I said, "Well, the media says it doesn't have side effects." I said, "No."
This is one of the reasons why we like to talk about famotidine, because compared to hydroxychloroquine, far fewer side effects or medication interactions. So
I'm
all the
scheduled.
things we take
I'm
into-
scheduled to fly tomorrow, so I'm gonna load up on Famotidine, vitamin C and D.
Oh, we got the other things, I'm assuming.
Yes. Thank you so much for your information. It's been a delight having you as guests, and I
Great.
hope our audience appreciates your vast knowledge in this matter.
Great.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Helen.
Thank you
Hope
so
to
Good
see
much.
luck
you
on
all.
your trip. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Very good.